Knowledge Bite series, Harnessing AI for OER, Bridging Content Gaps with Microsoft Copilot. This webinar series launched last year, and due to the high level of interest, we brought it back with a slate of new topics and speakers, and we're sort of in the middle of the series right now. We've got two subsequent or following final sessions coming up in January and February, and we'll share a link to those at the end of this session if you'd like to register. Minitex is a state-funded library organization located at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Our mission is to strengthen libraries, cultural institutions, and the communities they serve. So the format for today's webinar will be about 20 to 30 minutes presentation by Fran, our speaker, and plenty of time for questions at the end. This session will be recorded and made available via our Minitex YouTube channel. Feel free to type your questions in the chat at any time, and we'll be sure to get to them during the Q&A. You can also choose to raise your hand and unmute when called upon to ask your question at that time. Who are we? I'm Greg Argo, Open Education and Affordable Content Librarian here at Minitex, and I'll be your moderator for today. Sarah Ring is also here to help out and is the Continuing Education Librarian at Minitex. And on to our speaker introduction. We've got Fran Kennedy with us today. She's an instructional designer at the Minnesota State System Office. Fran, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. I will start sharing my PowerPoint at this time. There we are. Thumbs up. Can everyone see my screen? Greg?
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. As Greg mentioned, my name is Fran Kennedy. I'm an instructional designer at the System Office, and my presentation is titled Harnessing AI for Open Education, Open Educational Resources, Bridging Content Gaps with Microsoft Copilot. So I'm going to be talking primarily today about how to use Microsoft Copilot to help bridge gaps within open educational resources. So I'm going to start with an introduction of myself, so I'm not a complete stranger, and then I will provide a little bit of background about the project where I was using Microsoft Copilot, talk a little bit about Microsoft Copilot as a tool, and then I will explain how I used Microsoft Copilot for the project I will describe. Some learning outcomes for today's presentation. First, participants will recognize how to utilize Microsoft Copilot to generate relevant educational activities and assessments. Next, participants will explore how to effectively use Microsoft Copilot to create engaging and interactive learning materials that address specific educational needs. And lastly, participants will acquire strategies to improve AI-generated activities and assessments. So by the end of this brief session today, my goal is that you all walk away with these skills. So a little bit more about me. My name is Fran Kennedy. I use she, her pronouns. My educational and professional experience is kind of all over the place. I work as a college level instructor, teaching college writing classes, literature, and developmental writing. I help to manage system level projects, and I also serve as an instructional designer, developing open educational resources. My educational background, I have a Master of Arts in English Studies, as well as a Master's of Education in Higher Education, and then I recently completed a doctorate in educational leadership. Even though my experience and education is kind of scattered all over the place, one priority that I've always had throughout the duration of my career is to design learning experiences that are suitable for all learners. So my goal has always been to allow learners to understand and master the material being covered, regardless of how they're entering the classroom or learning experience. Outside of work, some of my favorite things include birds. You may hear my African gray parrot, Rico, chattering in the background. This is his talking hour, so please bear with me as we adjust to that. I enjoy practicing yoga, and I also like going to live shows. I currently live in Minneapolis, and we have a great music scene here, so I like to take advantage of that. As Greg and I both mentioned, I am part of Minnesota State Colleges and Universities. So if you are not familiar We are the third largest system of state colleges and universities within the country. We kind of toggle back between being the third and the fourth largest, but currently we're the third largest. And we are comprised of 26 state colleges and 7 universities, which are all pictured here. So before we begin, I would like to give you a moment to just think about how have you used AI in your own work. I'm going to be speaking specifically about Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, which is a Microsoft tool that Minnesota State employees have access to, mainly because that is the tool that I use in my work because it is password protected and protects the data that is entered into the tool. But your experience may be with another AI tool. If I am remembering correctly, I think the University of Minnesota uses Gemini. So if you have experience using Gemini or other AI tools, um, feel free to raise your hand and share your experience using artificial intelligence in your own work. Does anyone want to share? Or you can put it in the chat as well. I see Megan says Chat GPT for generating graphics for presentations. That's excellent. Anyone else?
I've been doing some advanced mathematics that is way over my head to do things like cost estimates and things like that. That's pretty cool.
That's a smart way to use it. Chat GPT for data analysis, Carla says. That's also a wonderful way to use AI. Okay. Well, if anyone else thinks of anything, feel free to drop it in the chat. But I want to give you an opportunity to think about how you use AI in your own work. Sarah says Google Gemini for transcript generation and alt text. Yes, that's also an amazing way to use it. So think about how you use AI in your own work. Maybe using artificial intelligence in your work is something that's new to you, or perhaps something that you haven't had an opportunity to explore yet. So hopefully this presentation allows you to start thinking a little bit more about how you might go about using AI or other tools within your own work to streamline the great work that you're doing. So a little bit about the project that I have been working on since I was hired in August 2023. I've been working to develop open educational resources for the Open Textbooks Pilot Program, which is the program. About that. There we go. Which is a program that's funded through the U.S. Department of Education through the Office of Post-Secondary Education. So this project was funded through August 2025. It was originally supposed to end in 2024, but we got a 1-year no-cost extension so that we were allowed to complete the work. The project originated in September 2021, and the goal was to develop open educational resources for courses that students in teacher education programs tend to have to take throughout their program. This work relied on collaborative partnerships among various campuses and system office stakeholders across Minnesota State. So my current role is as an instructional designer. I'm working on the project, and we had another instructional designer, my colleague Melissa Williams, also working on the project. But we also had instructional technologists helping us to create the work. We partnered with faculty across campuses to generate content for the open educational resources as well. We had a project manager. We have a grant manager as well. So there were a lot of different folks. We had an open educational resource librarian helping us. We had a Pressbooks manager also helping to guide the work. And we currently are working with an editor to go through the content and ensure that it's readable and make sense to an external audience. So we have been doing this work for quite a few years, and it has heavily relied on collaborative partnerships among various campuses to ensure that the work is quality and to also ensure that the work will be sustainable going forward. So to get an idea of what this work has looked like, we've been developing the course as an open educational resource. And with this, we have the textbook content. We also have activities that faculty can use within the context of their courses to help students understand the content of the books. We have assessments that include comprehensive rubrics so that instructors can assess their students' work without having to think about how they might go about doing so effectively. Interactive learning objects. So we have H5Ps incorporated into the press book so that users can test their knowledge as they go through the content. We've incorporated videos and embedded them within the content so that students are confronted with different ways of learning the materials. And then, as I mentioned, we have rubrics as well. We chose to align open educational resources and the rubrics included to INTAS standards, which are teacher education program standards that are used in a national context. So the goal of this work, especially since it's funded through a federal grant, is to not only have it be usable within the context of Minnesota state colleges and universities or within the state of Minnesota, but to have it be really usable across the country for any context that a teacher teaching within a teacher education program might find themselves in. So some guiding principles of the work that we have been doing. We wanted to make sure that the content that we're creating is aligned. So like I mentioned, aligned to national standards. We wanted to make sure that there was modularity. So the goal is that instructors can pick and choose which sections of the course or which sections of the open educational resource to incorporate within the context of their course. We wanted personalization for both students and faculty. So this comes in the form of many things, but especially giving users an opportunity to learn content in different ways. We wanted to ensure that it's accessible. We want all students to be able to go through the content and make sense of it. So we've had a heavy focus on accessibility. We've also had a huge focus on culturally responsive. So we have actually hired external reviewers to review for things such as accessibility, as well as culturally responsiveness. So these are things that were very important to guiding the work forward. And then lastly, we wanted to ensure that it was informed by learning science. So we didn't want to just include content because it's always been included. We wanted to include it in a very thoughtful way that allowed learners to not only read about it, but to understand it in context and to be able to effectively engage with the content. So Microsoft Copilot is the tool that I've been using to help try to bridge some of the gaps. And I'll be talking a little bit about what those gaps are. So when I say that I used Microsoft Copilot for this open educational resource project, I don't mean like I used it to generate content for the text, but rather I used it in more applicable ways. So as you know, Microsoft Copilot is a Microsoft-based artificial intelligence tool. If you've heard of ChatGPT, it's like the Microsoft equivalent of that. As I mentioned, it's enabled for all Minnesota State employees. So when I use Microsoft Copilot, I have to log in using my Minnesota State credentials. And as a result, the content that's entered into this AI tool is protected, which is very important to the work that we're doing. I have also participated in a pilot project regarding Copilot. So I actually have access to, I say, a more souped up version because it's a paid version, but this allows me to get better results than I was getting when I was using the unpaid version. So how it can be used. It can be used to generate ideas. Some of the work that we did, we had excellent content for the book or for the course. For the assessments and activities, we may have only had a suggestion or a few sentences about how an instructor might actually go about doing an activity. So we had a really great idea. So one way that I used it is I would plug in that idea to Microsoft Copilot and ask it, how might I create an activity around this idea? And then after it was able to generate some suggestions, I then was able to ask it to further develop those ideas. So we're using the TILT framework, which is transparency in teaching and learning, where you start assignments or activities with the purpose or the why, and then have comprehensive instructions on how to do that, as well as provide examples of how students might complete the activity. So I would also ask Copilot to help me fill in those blanks. Also be used for curriculum and assessment development. So like if you're thinking about how might I assess this activity, or how might I assess this assessment using a comprehensive rubric? Like what are some pillars or tenets that I might use to assess this work? This can be a great starting point for that. Using it for communication, I feel like this is probably the most prominent way that people go about using AI in their professional work, is helping to communicate goals and ideas to stakeholders. And then lastly, it can be a great place to start for rubric creation as well. So I want to really highlight like how Microsoft Copilot was employed in this project. But I want to start with this fourth bullet point, human intervention. You may have noticed as I'm talking about this, I'm saying it's a great starting point. It's a great starting point. I think it's really important that as we use artificial intelligence, we keep in mind that human intervention is a huge piece of that. So using AI, in my opinion, is not the type of tool that you want to use and then like set it and forget it, but rather the type of tool that you want to use very critically and think about it from a critical standpoint, while also considering, is this information accurate? Is this what I'm is this the goal that I'm trying to achieve? If it's not, then it needs to be manipulated or altered so that it is giving the results, or that the results are revised to fit the needs of the goal. I used Microsoft Copilot using intentional prompting. So in my example of taking ideas for activities and assessments, I would ask it to help me generate an activity. Like I would plug in an idea and say, list 3 activities that you could use to honor this idea in a college teaching education program. And then after that, I might ask it, create instructions for this activity, activity 2, using the TILT framework. And then if it is not producing what I'm hoping it'll produce, I can continue to manipulate the guidance to ensure that it does get to where I'm hoping it will go. Much like Sarah said, I have been using it to generate alt text for images. It's really important that the materials that we are creating are accessible for students, especially those using screen readers. So this was one of the most effective ways that I was able to use it, because we are incorporating quite a few images in the text, and a lot of the images did not have alt text, or if it did, it did not have effective alt text. So I was able to use Copilot to help generate these things. And then again, using that element of human intervention to ensure that the alt text is effective and in compliance with general accessibility best practices. So I want to apologize because this is an image that is not accessible. So if you do review the PowerPoint in the future, this is not the most accessible slide. But I wanted to give you an actual image of how I used Copilot to create an activity. So if you look at the example, it says, using this description, create an activity that includes a purpose of the activity, instructors for the instructor to prepare, and explicit instructions for students to complete the activity. And then it has the idea that we were working on. This was an idea that was generated by me and my colleague to help students understand the content in a different way. So it says, ask students to track what confirms their preconceptions, knowledge, what they learned that was new or challenged their preconceptions, and what questions were generated as they processed the material. Structure as an asynchronous discussion posting, but with the plan to bring all questions into class and create a wall of wonder. So I was able to use this to try to generate an activity. So this was the activity that it generated. So the title of the activity is Reflecting on Preconceptions and New Learnings. It has the purpose of the activity for students. It's really important that students know why they're doing the things that they're being asked to do and how that connects to their learning. So it says the purpose of this activity is to encourage students to critically engage with course material by tracking their preconceptions, new learnings, and questions that arise during their study. This reflective practice aims to deepen their understanding, challenge their assumptions, and foster a collaborative learning environment. The activity culminates in a class discussion that synthesizes these reflections into a wall of wonder, which serves as a resource for their course project, such as developing a teaching philosophy. One thing I really liked about how we went about developing the activities and how Copilot was able to honor that process is we wanted to make sure that instructors knew exactly what they needed to do to honor the activity so that they didn't have to think about what materials to bring to class or how to prepare beforehand for the activity. So this, after some manipulation, Copilot was able to mirror that process that we were aiming for to ensure that everything was very comprehensive for the instructor so that they were able to teach the material in an effective way. I mentioned that I've been an instructor. I've been teaching since 2013, and one of my least favorite things is teaching someone else's lesson plan. That can be really challenging because everyone has a different teaching philosophy and everyone approaches assignments and teaching differently. But what I like about this is that everything is explicit, it's comprehensive, it's easy for an instructor to see what the goal was. And then from there, make the call, okay, I'm going to adjust this thing or I'm going to change this thing so that it better aligns with my process. So that was the goal in this. We wanted teachers of all levels to be able to have an understanding of what the intended goal was with the activities, as well as how to ensure that the content that students were reading about aligned with the activities and assessment. Another thing I like about this is it has really comprehensive for student instructions for students as well. So students completing the activity also know exactly what is being asked of them and how to complete that. So we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I asked you all like, how do you currently use AI in your own work? And maybe you don't. Maybe that's not something that you're comfortable with yet, or maybe it's not something that you've started incorporating into your own work. But at this point, I want to ask you, how might you use AI in your own work? So, for instance, if you're teaching a course, you might choose to use AI to create announcements for students, so that students know exactly what is expected of them for that week's activities. You might use AI to place students into randomized groups. For instance, you could copy your course list of students and ask AI to create 5 randomized groups based on the names that you included. You could use it like I used it to create activities. Some people use AI to generate content for OER. In fact, there are some AI platforms that are used specifically for this purpose. You can use it to rewrite content more concisely. When I'm drafting emails to folks, I sometimes say what could be said in 2 sentences and 4 sentences. So I like to ask AI, please rewrite this for conciseness and clarity. Another thing you could do is use it to find articles for students to read. I've actually had college research writing students take a thesis statement that they drafted and plug it into AI and say, please suggest 3 to 5 articles that might be relevant for this topic. Because sometimes finding sources to use in writing can be really challenging. But using AI allows them to at least have a starting point. And those starting points all have references listed at the end that could also be a great starting point for them. So these are some ways that I've thought about using AI in my own work or in higher education work in general. What else does anyone want to share about how they might use AI in their own work? Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to share. And I cannot currently see the chat, Greg. Do you see any comments there?
It's it's been quiet.
Okay.
I've used I only use it sometimes to just be like, hey, here's what I think or what I've gathered about such and such topic or something like, what am I missing? So it kind of like work as a works as an editor or a right hand sometimes, I guess.
Yeah. When I was writing my dissertation, I wanted to make sure that I was covering this was after I actually submitted my dissertation, so it wasn't actually super helpful, but I typed in, the main idea of my dissertation and asked it like if I were to write a literature review on this topic, what are some headings and subheadings that I might use, or what are some topics that I might touch on? And it ended up generating something that was very similar to what I had written. So I felt like I honored the conversation around my dissertation topic.
I
Okay,
also started a like have to administer a grant program and had never really done a full-fledged one before. So I had it walk me through the typical steps of administering a grant program and making sure that when I was communicating out that I had kind of like the basics or the baseline at least of what a normal um, structure of one of those things looks like.
that's a great way to use it too. Using AI as a tutor to help understand a new genre, I think is really effective. All right, we'll let people stew. Maybe they'll have something to say after the presentation. But I just want to say thank you for your time and thank you for letting me share what I learned about AI as I close this project and how I incorporated it in my own work.
Thank you, Fran. Anybody has any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask or type them into the chat. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and wrap up with a few slides. Okay. We do have a survey, and I believe we'll be following up with an email on this thing. And we do have 2 more sessions, um, January and February. And if you follow the link there, you can um, register for those. I'm also actually am going to share those in the chat quick. So Does anybody have experience using Copilot at their institution, or I've not used Copilot myself. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's somebody, Carol. PowerPoint presentations. Fran, I was going to ask you, so when you're working with prompting and things like that, are you kind of like sticking with one thread and developing it over a number of weeks, months, and getting mileage out of kind of like the past experience you've had with the thread, or do you do more of a start a new thread frequently type thing?
It really depends. If I'm trying to get Copilot to continue following a pattern, I might continue on the thread.
Hmm.
But I believe sometimes when I try to do that, it prompts me to start a new chat because I think that the conversation comes to a close. I found though that it's better to stick with the same thread if you're hoping to continue with the same pattern.
Hmm.
The downside of that is sometimes it tries to incorporate ideas from a past. Like if I were to try to generate a second activity, it might try to incorporate elements of the first activity and the second activity. So that's again where human intervention is very important for mitigating that.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Um, your past follows you through your different chats.
Yeah.
Is As far as like your organization or where you're working, obviously they've got a contract with Copilot. Is this fairly well encouraged, or are you kind of going out on your own? And kind of like how is that? How is that at where you work?
Yeah, it's encouraged. We have practices or guidance for using AI. We also have some subcommittees that focus on um, becoming fluent in AI, and then they share out their knowledge and their best practices widely. Our campuses are still determining what the campus policies will be. So I'm at the system office, so we've created a booklet that provides guidance, but that is to the user's discretion. It is just a suggestion. And like I said, campuses are still figuring out what their own policies are. As far as teaching and using AI, I do have a statement in my syllabi explaining how AI use is considered academic dishonesty in the context of my course. And that's primarily because I teach writing, and oftentimes one of the goal areas of student learning outcomes in a writing class is critical thinking. And in the context where students are still developing critical thinking, it's important to me that they're not relying on AI because they might not know how to navigate that human intervention. And it's also important that they learn how to write effectively before relying on an external tool to write for them.
Carol popped into the chat to say that their college also encourages staff and faculty to use Copilot. Is it one more question. You were working with this in-task standards. Were you using Copilot to kind of like work with those, and did it invent any or modify any?
No, we actually did not use that for the standards or for the alignments. So we were able to use in task and realize that a lot of state standards um, align to in task or use the actual language of in task standards in their own state standards.
Cool. I was thinking it would. maybe someday, like you've got your in-task standards that you're focused on, that maybe AI would be a way to draw in parallel standards or similar standards and really like bulk that book up a bit with all kinds of different standards.
Right. No, so Minnesota uses like standards of effective practice, and we were able to look at the language and see how that was reflected in task standards. And then we were able to see other state standards for teacher education programs. And we noticed that a lot of states have actually generated crosswalks that align to the in-task standards. So that kind of confirmed that we selected um, prevalent standards that could be used in the context of any teacher education program in the United States.
So then once you've developed an activity that you're happy with, are you kind of doing knowledge management and creating a template for the prompt that you can use again, or are you just kind of like winging it and coming up with activities kind of with new prompts every time?
We definitely tried to preserve the prompting that we were using with AI so that it could be duplicated in future projects.
Cool. I kind of wing it. Wish I was a little more organized.
Yes.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in. I think we can wrap this one up. Um, Thank you, Fran. It's been very cool to see what you've been doing on the OER side. Thanks everybody for showing up. And remember, you can go to the Minitex website and sign up for the last two sessions in January and February. Have a good day.